Storytime about how my mother-in-law accused me of cheating on her son. Disclaimer, it's not my storytime, it's not on my Instagram. My evil mother-in-law is the worst of the worst. The moment I started dating her perfect little son, she would make judgmental comments on my body, and if I was ever in the kitchen cooking, she would be there to try to criticize everything that I would do. When my husband and I finally got pregnant, she pretended to be happy. I could see deep down inside she was hating the fact that I was pregnant. I think she always had the hope that he would leave me. But let me give you some background info on my husband. This man is lucky to be with me. Not only am I a 12, I am so kind and caring to him, and I have way too much patience for him. Whereas my mother-in-law thinks that he's the one lucky to be with me. First off, I make way more money than my husband, so I'm the one paying for most of the bills. But guess what? My husband asked me not to tell his mom about that because he'd be embarrassed. He also doesn't know how to cook or clean. And guess why? Because his mother did everything for him growing up. So I'm the one that has to cook, clean, and pay for the bills. A few months ago, I asked my husband for a divorce. He ran over to his mom's house and tried to get her to convince me not to. But guess what? His mom called me and told me that she'd convince him to give me a divorce. Part 2 is up. Storytime about how my mother-in-law accused me of cheating on her son. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's on me on Instagram. So instead of her trying to convince me not to leave him, she told me that she would convince my husband to break up with me. This was all for my benefit because I was the one that wanted a divorce. But 2 weeks later, I find out I'm pregnant. At the time, we were still living in the same house, but we weren't really talking. So I finally went up to him and told him that I was pregnant. He was so happy. You think he even gave me a hug or a kiss? No, he picked up the phone and called his mother right away. He called her on speaker and I could hear what she was saying. And as soon as he told her, she said, "It's probably not your kid." How could I have not seen this coming? At this point, she thought we were gonna get a divorce. So me having a kid was the worst case scenario for her. Right away, she told him to kick me out of the house that I pay for. That's when I grabbed the phone from him and I started telling her everything. First off, I told her that I paid for all the bills and that her son made only $200 a week from a stupid gaming thing and that he wasn't even bothering to look for another job. And then on top of paying for the bills, I still had to cook and clean. And I asked her, "Do you really think this is the kind of man I want to have a kid with?" She had no response. That's when she hung up the phone and told my husband to go over to her house. Part 3 is up. Storytime about how my mother-in-law accused me of cheating on her son. Disclaimer, is not my storytime, it's not on my Instagram. When I broke the news to her that he didn't pay for any of the bills and that I was paying for the house, she literally lost her shit. My husband hung up the phone and told me that he would never speak to me again. God, if only that were true. Then he goes over to his mom's house and guess what? An hour later, he demands I go over to her house to apologize to his mother. I said that I would, but instead, I went over there and told her some more truths. I ended up telling her that her son told me not to tell her that he didn't make any money, and that the whole time he and I were together, she thought that he was paying for all the bills. Then I said, "Aren't you embarrassed that your son is like that?" That's when she told me the only way she would accept my child was with a paternity test. Am I supposed to do that with the baby in my belly? Finally, the baby was born and I was able to prove that it was his son. My husband wants us to stay together, but his mom keeps criticizing me. Every time she sees the kid, she says it doesn't look like my husband, even though I already proved that it was his. I think that I should get a divorce. I'm afraid my mother-in-law might do something to the baby. My husband thinks I'm just overreacting. What should I do?
Am I the asshole for telling my stepdaughter she's lucky I treat her as my own? Disclaimer, this is not my story. I, 44 female, have 2 children with my husband, a 2-year-old boy, a 3-year-old girl, and a bonus daughter, 18 female, Emily. My stepdaughter has been living with us for 6 months this past year. She moved in because she told us her mother kicked her out since they didn't have a good relationship and her mother said she was too problematic. Since her moving in, I've been very welcoming and I've spent more than enough money to help her get on her feet. This includes work shoes, comforter sets for her bed, hair products, clothing, and underwear. We told her she could live here as long as she needed, but since her moving here, she'd become a burden to both my children and I. My children and I are used to a regimen of waking up, spending time with my husband, him dropping them off to daycare, and he goes off to work, and when he gets home, I cook and clean, and we spend the rest of the night with the kids. My stepdaughter has become a burden. She became entitled, and whenever she needs anything financially, she will ask either myself or my husband. When I bought her work uniform, she kept the job for 3 weeks. Am I the asshole for telling my stepdaughter she's lucky I treat her as my own? Disclaimer, this is not my story. When I bought her work uniform, she kept the job for 3 weeks and quit because she didn't like her coworkers. She has taken most of my savings, taken the time from my children to my husband, and used that time for herself and has been extremely unappreciative for what I've done for her. I told her she needs to figure out a living plan because she's 18 and a legal adult and that she needs to start adulting. She mentioned how she was in online school, and I told her that wasn't enough since there are more hours in the day and she can do more things than just be lazy and use her computer as an excuse. She told me that I'm jealous of her relationship with my husband, and I reminded her that she's living in our home rent-free. I told her she should be lucky that I treat her as my own because not everyone would do such for their stepchild. My husband thinks I'm wrong for saying this to her and that what I did was harsh, but I don't see how when she's 18 years old and she's grown. So am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for telling my mom she only has 1 kid? Disclaimer, this is not my story. My parents divorced when my sister, 20 female, and I, 19 male, were 5 and 6 years old. She met her husband 3 years later. He was a widower with a 7-month-old son. She instantly moved them in and started claiming his son as her own and raising him like us. She got engaged to him, and a few weeks before the wedding, our dad died. By this point, my mom had just become estranged from her entire extended family. She told my dad's parents that if they wanted to see us again soon, they would need to come to her wedding and watch all 3 of us, including my stepbrother. She then told them after the wedding that going forward, if they wanted to see us or spend time with us, they had to include him. They didn't want to do that. They tried to argue for time with just us, offering to pay for it all 100%. But my mom said no. She said they need to come to the house and make an effort with all 3 and not just take 2 with them. My sister and I would argue with my mom over one day in particular, which was my dad's birthday. Am I the asshole for telling my mom she only has 1 kid? Disclaimer, this is not my story. We celebrated my dad's birthday with his family every year after he died, but she wouldn't even let that day just be us and them. Our stepbrother had to be there. She said we shouldn't see him as any less deserving of being present. But we did. He's not our dad's kid and has never met him. So why was he deserving of being there? I never got that. She called us selfish for that mindset. Last year I turned 18 and moved in with my girlfriend. Once I left home, my stepbrother was no longer invited to anything to do with my dad's family. My sister and I also stopped spending time at my mom's house. It was quiet for several months, then last week my mom showed up where I work and demanded we talk. She told me she was tired of one of her kids being left out and how sick it was to disregard him in that way. I told her she only had 1 kid, her stepson, and that my sister and I were no longer her kids. And that my dad's family were no longer forced to include him to see us and that it was all her fault for forcing it in the first place. I then asked her to leave. She texted me that night and said she was a good mom to all 3 of us. Am I the asshole for banning my deceased wife's parents from her funeral? Disclaimer, this is not my story. My 32 female wife, 30 female, passed away in childbirth about 3 months ago. Obviously, a sperm donor was involved, but the problem from the start was that neither of us wanted biological children and intended to adopt. Her mother has always said she wanted biological grandchildren, and despite insisting that she wasn't homophobic, she was furious when we got married and spent years demanding my wife have a child via sperm donor. Finally, my wife gave in because she had no health problems and was told it would be a safe pregnancy. Everything was fine until the birth. Because I believe her mother is responsible for her death, I informed her that she will not be told where the funeral is taking place. She also would not be invited and she would be told to leave if she tried to show up, and the same goes for her husband. I also made it very clear they will never have contact with their daughter. I'm considering filing a restraining order to keep her safe. Am I the asshole for banning my deceased wife's parents from her funeral? Disclaimer, this is not my story. They're mad that I've blocked their numbers, but fortunately most of my in-laws agree with my decision. My brother-in-law has completely cut contact with them. They didn't come to the funeral but have been telling everyone they know I'm a heartless monster who denied them closure and I'm denying them access to their granddaughter out of spite. I've lost some friends over this and my mother is saying that even if they're terrible people, they deserve a chance to tell their daughter goodbye. My wife said for years that she wanted to adopt when we were older and more financially secure. She always clearly stated that she never wanted to be pregnant. Her mother would call, text, and drop by to visit several times a week to guilt trip and harass her into carrying a child. When my wife announced our engagement, her father initially refused to attend the wedding. He did end up coming, but he did not walk her down the aisle. My brother-in-law was low contact with them already due to emotional abuse in his childhood. From my understanding, my wife was a golden child and felt pressure to live up to their expectations. So am I the asshole?
Am I the asshole for telling my sister that she should have shaved before coming to my engagement party? I, female 27, got engaged recently and we had the party at a restaurant. It was paid for by my future mother-in-law. My sister, female 22, came with my parents and she's the type that lives by the body positivity concept, which is more than okay, but it tends to put me in situations. She came to the party wearing a dress above the knee and my future mother-in-law and other women were staring at her legs constantly. Mother-in-law pulled me aside and pointed out my sister's leg hair. I was baffled and quite shocked and she said it made her and the other woman uneasy and weirded out. I said I was sorry calmly, but I was really mad. Am I the asshole for telling my sister she should have shaved before coming to my engagement party? I said I was sorry and tried to stay calm, but I was mad from the inside. The woman continued to stare and my sister acted like everything was fine. I honestly felt like she caused disruption to the party. I brought it up with her later and told her what the guests felt about her unshaved legs. She kept chewing on gum while completely acting like it was nothing. She even said my future mother-in-law and the woman needed to chill out. I said this was unacceptable and that she should have shaved before coming. My parents are telling me to get off her back and leave her alone, and then they left. My mom wants me to apologize, and my husband said that we're ridiculous. Am I wrong? Am I the asshole for asking my boyfriend to switch meals with me? I've been friends with my boyfriend for years, and we got together 3 months ago. When we go out to eat, he always orders a cheeseburger, plain ketchup on the side with honey mustard to dip his fries. He loves exotic food, but he says the whole ordering and making choices is super stressful. I love trying exotic things, and to me that's the whole reason to go out. But sometimes I don't end up liking the food, so I ask him to switch, and he says yes. So last night we went to a sports bar, and they had a calamari special, which I got, and he got a cheeseburger. I didn't like the calamari, so I asked him to switch with me, and he said no. I asked why not, and he said I shouldn't have effing ordered it. Am I the asshole for asking my boyfriend to switch meals with me? I said excuse me, and he went into a tirade and said I treat him like a garbage disposal. He's a grown man, I'm being immature, and don't pin my crap on him. It sounded like it was a rehearsed speech. He said maybe it was since I insist on stealing his food every time we go somewhere. I started crying, and he said don't start that BS with me. Here, have both meals, and he got up and walked out. He has not called or texted me, and it's 6 a.m. I thought he would have called to apologize by now. I called my sister, and she said you're the asshole for waking me up at 5:30, and he probably sees it as you insisting.